My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are recording in the same room.
This is unheard of.
This is crazy. For the first time in 16 months, we are recording in the exact same space. We're not even 6 feet apart.
In case you're worried about our health, we're both vaccinated, so it's all good.
We're good.
You know something? I was doing some calculation this morning, Kristin Dilley, and this is actually more like 18 months. Ooh. Because we recorded our first episodes of Mind Over Murder face-to-face in your kitchen.
Yes.
In December 2019.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't that sound like a long time ago?
It does. It feels like a long time ago. But we're here in the beautiful Maple House in Norfolk, Connecticut, which is Bill and his partner Pamela's lovely bed and breakfast, and it is gorgeous. And I am up here for the week with my boyfriend Mark, and we've stayed with Bill and Pamela, and it is fantastic, and it's lovely, and we're having a blast. And we're recording face-to-face.
Right here in the library. It's very exciting. I had to go around and set up cables, but I was really excited, and we turned off the fan to reduce background noise, so it's nice and toasty, I would say.
It's toasty. Yeah, I'm wondering if the quality is going to be any different because we're not going to have Zoom occasionally fritzing one or the other of us.
I'll bet it's going to be better.
It's going to be better, yeah.
It's very exciting. We just were trying to figure out, can we get through this without too much insanity?
Probably not, because it's also 9:14 in the evening and we're just now getting started after a day of insanity and revelry.
Well, you and Mark had some touristy stuff to do today.
We did. We had touristy stuff to do today, and we have touristy stuff to do tomorrow. But it's been very, very nice to actually record face to face, and we've got all sorts of great stuff coming down the pike for the rest of y'all. So,
well, and without giving away any of your plans, I think our listeners who are in the Boston area who will be hearing this later, so this is no help at all.
Right.
If you thought you saw Kristin Dilley in the Boston area, you might have actually seen her.
Well, no, because I'm not going to Boston. I'm going to Salem.
It's true.
That is true.
And Concord.
Concord. Mm-hmm.
These two are big history buffs, so they're going to go do some hysterical stuff.
Well, some hysterical stuff?
Yeah, that's what it's referred to in New England as hysterical New England stuff.
Well, this is also...
So where are you going?
Well, as I am an 11th grade American history teacher, and I teach the Crucible, which is all about the Salem witch trials, and I teach the Transcendentalists. So we are going to the House of Seven Gables, and we're going to Orchard House, and we're going to Walden Pond, and we're going to every place in Salem that is cool, and we're going to Henry David Thoreau's cabin and Ralph Waldo Emerson's house. So yeah, great stuff.
Will they be there?
I don't think so. Not unless I bring a Ouija board.
In spirit?
Possibly in spirit.
That's right. We actually have had some great times discussing alternate hysterical events too.
Yes.
I'm sorry, those are historical events, including Bigfoot.
Yes.
UFOs.
Yep.
What are those fireball things called again?
Will-o'-the-wisps.
I never even knew this. I've learned stuff this time.
Right?
You can tell when you're hanging out with a teacher when you learn useful new expressions like will-o'-the-wisp.
Will-o'-the-wisps, yes. So we're going to have a blast, and it's been really nice being here the last couple of days. So, but yeah, as Bill pointed out, it's been 18 months since we've recorded in person.
Yeah.
And this is momentous for us. So,
it is.
Yay.
It is. Before this whole COVID thing, our original plan was that we were going to record more of these podcasts face to face.
Yep.
And we were even going to meet in the middle. And we will be able to do some of those things now in the future.
Yes, we hope. And we did. We had all of these plans, all of these people up and down the East Coast that we were going to like go and take our little setup to them. And we were going to record with them. Like originally we're going to go to Ocean City and hang out with Gemma Hoskins for a little bit.
That's right. I think she'd still let us if we asked her.
Yeah, she would still let, right, Gemma? You would let us, right? She would.
She would.
Wonderful.
Yeah, she is.
But of course we had Gemma on the podcast earlier this year, but
but we could do a round 2 at her beachside house.
Yes. So this is great. We're very excited. We've been thinking about what new information we can provide y'all with as we're sitting here and talking and thinking our thoughts and ruminating on the case as we do. It occurred to us that we have learned a lot of new information in the last couple of weeks. For people who've worked on the same case for as long as we have, you would kind of think that maybe you've learned all there is to know. No.
The Colonial Parkway Murders is one of those cases that just goes on. And we learned new things in the last few weeks. And we actually kind of wanted to recap some of the things that we've learned, or maybe think we've learned, in the last few weeks.
Absolutely. Most of what we learned, I would say, have come from 2 of our guests in particular. And so we do want to give a shout out to Janette Santiago and to Judy Knobling for taking the time to talk with us over what we know is a very difficult subject and to provide us with some new pieces of information to chew on.
Both women, I think, did an extraordinary job, and a number of people commented on how terrific they were, but also, and you can hear it in the podcast if you listen carefully, it was a difficult interview. The 2 of us were both tearing up at different times. And I'm not saying that never happens, but listening to these 2 amazing women describe what happened to their loved ones and the aftermath and their observations, and then we were receiving information that we'd never heard before, it was difficult in spots, especially and most importantly for them. And we really appreciate the fact that they were willing to do this. We do try to inject some lighter moments so that it's not just incredibly heavy for 45 minutes, so it feels like an onslaught. But at the same time, you're talking about unsolved murders and beautiful young people that we lost. And there were some tough moments, and I have to thank both of them for their ability to get through it and to inform all of us as listeners, what that feels like, what that experience is like.
As you know very well, Bill, it never really goes away. It's the grief and the loss and everything is right there. You can really hear it in Janette's voice and in Judy's voice as well. So it is extraordinarily brave of them to take the time to talk to us. And we do thank them very, very much for that.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors.
Who wants some brand new Mind Over Murder merchandise? You do, of course. And our friends at TeePublic have hooked us up with some great merchandise.
There are Mind Over Murder t-shirts available in about 6 different weights. Female, male, soft, not so soft, something that looks like your old gym shirt. All of the above.
And in any color that you want as well. The possibilities are limitless.
And then we have tank tops, crew neck sweatshirts, which probably won't be big in July, but might be more popular, say, in October.
Better for those cooler months.
And also for cooler months, long sleeve t-shirts, baseball t-shirts, and you get to configure the color of the shirt and the color of your sleeves. You could do your entire women's softball team in Mind Over Murder t-shirts, baseball
I like
style.
that idea. We've also got mugs available, magnets, stickers, laptop cases, phone cases, and tote bags. I'm going to order a couple of tote bags. I can take one every day of the week to school.
We've got masks, which I hope we won't be wearing soon.
Right?
And wall art, notebooks, a pillow. I don't know if I need a Mind Over Murder pillow, but somebody else might love it.
Perfect for your living room.
And then for the younger crime fighters, we have kids t-shirts, kids hoodies, kids long sleeve t-shirts in a variety of colors. All of these things can be configured just about in any color you can imagine. And then my favorite, the Mind Over Murder onesie for the smallest crime fighters among us.
So if you're interested in any of this great merchandise, take a look at the website at tpublic.com and type in Mind Over Murder Podcast. You can also look for links on our social media pages and in our show notes.
We're back here at Mind Over Murder. So what are some of the things that we think we've learned now from the last couple of weeks before we move on with further exploration of the Colonial Parkway murders? What are some of the things that were our takeaways?
Well, I think we learned a certain amount about relationships between the various parties involved in David and Robin's murder. I was surprised, and maybe I shouldn't have. If I'd really been thinking about it in terms of age range, maybe I wouldn't have been surprised. I was just surprised to learn, for example, that Janette went to elementary school with David Knobling.
In all the years we've been exploring this case, meeting with these families, I never knew that. I had always thought that there was little to no connection between the Edwards family and the Knobling family, and apparently that's wrong. They actually did know each other, and those two people, Janette and David, went to school together. And of course, we heard that funny, slightly mischievous, I was going to say off color. I don't know if it's quite that strong.
It's just mischievous. He's a kid.
Yeah, but funny story about David in elementary school picking up the girls' dresses when they were watching a movie. I can picture the lights going down and, them getting the movie started, and then there's some goofball kid sliding around on the floor.
Yeah. As a teacher, you could pretty much expect that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, of course, there would be a whole lot more in terms of like lawsuits and liabilities to go along with it. But there's always some kid who's going to try that. So yeah, learning that there was that connection between the two families, I had no idea. I know that surprised me, and I'm pretty sure it surprised you as well. So.
Yeah, I had never heard that before. So it's interesting that these issues come out. On a more serious note, both women, Janette first and then Judy last week, made an interesting observation. They both feel strongly that the murder of Robin Edwards and David Knobling is not related to the other Colonial Parkway murders.
And I think that is something that between the two of us, when we kick around which cases we think might eventually end up off the table in terms of cases that are related to each other, I feel like the Edwards Knobling case is the one that we've always felt maybe had the least connection to all of the others. I think I was a little surprised to hear it from both of them, but at the same time, it was also like, I can see that.
Now, I'm making a little bit of a sour lemon face, understanding that a podcast is an audio experience. So let me explain the sour lemon face. Personally, I think case number 4, which we'll be exploring in the coming weeks, Phelps-Lauer, that's the one that happened on Interstate 64. Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, who disappeared over Labor Day weekend 1989. That's the one, from my point of view, that feels the least like the other so-called Colonial Parkway murders. So I don't know. I mean, I am still far from convinced that all 4 of these double homicides are related. The more things we learn, the more I'm convinced that some of these murders are absolutely not related to the others. You can make a case that Edwards Knobling is something else, and we'll get into some of the possibilities over the next few minutes. It's interesting that both of our guests over the last few weeks felt so strongly that their loved ones' murder is not related to the other murders in the so-called Colonial Parkway murders.
And both of them basically said, we think it was a wrong place, wrong time sort of scenario. Just they were in a place where they should not have been at a time when they should not have been, and they witnessed something. And I'm going to guess maybe a drug deal. Drug deal
that they don't necessarily think that they were involved with.
Right.
Funny, both women also said, Janette and Judy said, that they had no family or personal connection to this place, the Ragged Island Wildlife. Sometimes we say refuge. It was called the refuge back then. Now they seem to refer to it as the management area. It's Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area. I don't know why they changed the name over the 30 years, but they didn't seem to have a connection to that place.
Right.
and didn't know that Robin or David ever went there. As we've discussed on the podcast before, it has a reputation. That parking lot next to the James River Bridge on the Ragged Island side has a reputation as a place for low-level drug deals and hookups, gay and straight, and does to this day. It did 34 years ago, and it does now. I don't know if Robin and David had been there before. As we've talked about, if you wanted to make a low-level drug deal in the late 1980s, there's no cell phone, there's no internet. You don't pick up your iPhone to make an appointment to meet your drug dealer to buy some pot. Yep. You go to the place where the pot dealers are, and you score whatever you're looking to buy.
Yeah.
I'm not accusing either one of our guests of being naive. They seem far from it, but I'm going to make a personal observation here. I think there are only two reasons to drive the 4.5 miles across the river from the Newport News side to the very quiet, especially at that time, 30 plus years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I think you either go there for a low-level drug deal or a hookup, a place to have sex and romance.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm missing anything else.
No, I don't think you are. And we'd actually had an interesting discussion, you and I, the other day. And it probably speaks to my own naivete because you immediately knew an answer that I did not. And I said, well, why would you go over to Ragged Island when there's plenty of places in Hampton or Newport News where you could probably score pot?
Oh, sure.
And do you remember what you told me?
I don't remember exactly. What did I say?
You had said that it was probably easier to get out of the jurisdiction of Newport News, which was probably a bit more heavily patrolled, and over to Isle of Wight, where it would not have been as heavily patrolled, which is not something that would have occurred to me. Maybe it should have. That was an immediate answer. So clearly it was, I figured it was something you'd given some thought to.
On the more populated side of the river, which is where Robin and David are from.
Yep.
They're from the Hampton Roads, Newport News side of things. That's where the shipyard is. That's where the city is.
Yeah.
That's where the industry is. There are police forces that are pretty substantial, even 30 years ago. Your chances of running into problems with Johnny Law while looking to buy some pot, I think, are significantly higher versus driving 4.5 miles across the bridge. There's no toll. You then are on the far side of the river, the James River, and you're now in Isle of Wight, which has a much smaller police force. And these areas, although they're patrolled, are more lightly patrolled. You could pretty much go there, conduct some discreet business was, I think, an expression you used recently when we were discussing this.
Yep.
Make your deal, buy some pot or whatever, and then leave.
It's always a little bit of a delicate discussion to be had because we don't want to make it sound like we are accusing anybody of bad behavior. It had always felt a little weird to me going, oh, well, clearly they were over there for a drug deal because you can't assume that they were. But we did learn from Judy Knobling that she had found a roach in David's truck. And for those people who may not be familiar with the term, Bill, can you explain?
This would be a leftover marijuana cigarette, the butt end of a marijuana cigarette, which many people will save and smoke later. I've said all along regarding the Colonial Parkway murders, I don't think we're ever implying anything when we talk about what potentially took our victims to these locations. Look, these are young people doing young people things. And the idea that teenagers are going to go to isolated places, engage in romantic or sexual behavior, maybe drink beer or smoke pot, these are not shocking revelations, whether we're talking about last week or 30-something years ago. It was very interesting to the two of us that Judy said when she was looking in her son David's truck, she found a marijuana cigarette. She also told us that she found a marijuana cigarette. She took it, did not tell the police about it.
Yeah.
And has never told them to this day. Again, I don't think it's shocking that, there was a roach in the ashtray of his Ford Ranger pickup.
Right.
And I think Judy was making the decision she felt was right at the time.
Sure, absolutely.
And remember, she probably found the roach before they'd found the bodies. It probably didn't occur to her later to say, oh, by the way, I found marijuana in his ashtray. It is interesting now in retrospect, and we're certainly not trying to criticize anyone, particularly a grieving mother, no less, on decisions that she made nearly 34 years ago. They probably were smoking marijuana that evening.
Yeah. It does solidify to us a reason why they might have been at Ragged Island in a way that it hasn't. We've only been able to speculate beforehand. We've been, we don't know that David or Robin were smoking pot. Well, now we do have some evidence that at least David was.
Sure.
And so I feel like that kind of solidified a little bit of thinking for both of us there. Like, okay, well, this now is a very clear reason why they might have been at Ragged Island.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helped solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Judy also made a number of interesting observations, as did Janette. Judy had said that, I don't know if she used the word staged or not. I don't think she might have used that word, but I think she said setup. The truck felt like a setup. And she said the way the clothes were on the center console and his wallet up on the dashboard. She, like her son Michael, has made observations that are quite similar. She said that the truck was found in such disarray and oddly parked with the nose in, as we've talked about before, where David was always in the habit of parking his truck nose out. And the shoes on the floor, which turned out to be Robin's sneakers. She said all of these things were so out of character for how David would have left his truck.
Yes, exactly. Now, we did spend quite a bit of time discussing Ron Little and Liberty Security. And as we have stated before and will continue to state, we are not implying, nor should you infer, that Ron Little had any involvement with these murders. He did put himself in the middle of the investigation, but we are not saying that he deserved to be there. We are just presenting the facts to you. So we did, of course, feel like we needed to ask Janette about her opinion with regard to Ron Little and Liberty Security, because her mother, Bonnie, did work for Liberty Security, which we mentioned in our previous podcast episodes about Liberty. And it was interesting, a little bit of insider information on how we come up with our questions. Bill and I come up with our questions ahead of time. We don't work off of a script, but we're not shooting from the hip either. But that wasn't a question that I had planned on asking Janette. I didn't have it in my notes. It occurred to me as we were headed toward the end there, I was like, let me just ask her about Liberty Security. And I was glad that I did, because we did get some acknowledgement from Janette that even though, her mom, Bonnie, did work for Liberty, she does not think that they had anything to do with Robin's murder. Was that a surprising response to you?
It was an interesting response. It makes me want to talk to Bonnie, Robin's mom, whom we've spoken to before off air, and who participated in the Lover's Lane Murders television series. It kind of makes me want to circle back with Bonnie, if she's willing, to kind of explore that a little bit further, particularly since you and I have received tips in the last few months that steered us back towards Ron Little and new information regarding Ron Little. There's still people I need to follow up with, even as I speak tonight, that have provided us with information that I need to kind of run to ground before I turn it over to the FBI. It probably makes me want to go back and ask Bonnie, Robin's mom, more about this information. And obviously, the closer we can get to this source,
Sure.
the better off we are. Janette can obviously offer a number of observations that she herself was there for or she lived. In the example of the Ron Little Liberty Security, Bonnie Edwards questions, I think it would be great to get back with Bonnie. So that's definitely on our to-do list. Something else that had come up, I'd heard observations about this, but now we're getting two slightly different stories. We're asking people to remember things that happened 34 years ago. And some of this is through the haze of grief. Both women seem to recall that Robin Edwards had run away. Mm-hmm. Janette told a story which we had not heard before, which is that Robin had run away, and Blaine Pardo covers some of this material in his book with his daughter, Victoria Hester, regarding Robin running away and being gone for what sounds like a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I think Robin may have been in a situation where she was being taken advantage of by some older men who were in their 20s, and she's quite young. And of course, she's behaving like someone who's much older than 14. It's quite inappropriate in terms of the way I think these men treated her.
Ugh.
But we had never heard this part of the story, which is that her mom, Bonnie, went on television. Janette's recollection is that it's WAVY, which is one of the 3 television stations in town, and had begged Robin to return, to come home, that she was missed. They were not getting a lot of support or cooperation from the Newport News Police Department. Her mom went on local television and begged her to come home, and Robin was there at this apartment with these men and another young woman. It appears that entreaty from her mom was enough to get Robin to say to her friend, they really do miss us. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we should go home, and they did. I'd never heard that story before.
No, neither had I. And we did get, every once in a while, we will get some information and we're like, okay, probably we need to fact check that just to see, just to make sure that we're, not in the wrong on any of this. We did hear from Judy that she understood that Robin had been in like a halfway house kind of situation prior to her death. I don't remember Janette mentioning that, so I think that's something that we should definitely circle back around with her about. Mm-hmm. But that was an interesting, and it was almost an offhand comment from her.
It was. I don't know if Judy's got her facts completely nailed down. Remember that Robin is not her daughter.
Right, yeah.
That's Judy's recollection, so it'll be really interesting to see if that's factually accurate. It's possible we may be blending through the haze of time those two events, and perhaps Robin's running away is being remembered slightly differently.
Yeah, it could be.
By Judy, who obviously didn't live that.
So there is certainly a good amount of new information, both, small in scale, but also bigger too, that we've gleaned from these 2 most recent interviews with Janette and Judy. Because Bill and I are who we are, we spend a lot of time talking to each other and ruminating and going, but what do you think it all means? That is something that we do. Every time we finish with an interview, we sit, we talk, we digest a little bit. Then we call each other the next day and say, hey, you know what I was thinking about? And we do it all over again.
Yeah.
So these are the things that we ruminate about. If you ever want a little behind the scenes about what goes on at Mind Over Murder, this is it. we interview, we talk, we go back on the phone with each other, and it just continues.
Right. Oh, something else that we both talked about, and we don't know if he'll say yes. One of the things that we'd like to do is reach out to Carl Knobling.
Yeah.
David's father, and Carl and Judy were divorced and rather estranged by this point. Interestingly, despite the fact that the marriage did not end happily, I was surprised that they haven't ever discussed it much since. Mm-hmm. Carl is a very direct and plain-spoken guy. I've spoken to him before over the phone. I've never met him in person. Now, he did do a very good series of interviews for the Lover's Lane murders and told the story about how he had discovered David's body. Some of it's obviously very difficult for him to talk about. Listening to Judy tell her kind of half of the story, it made me think, let's at least try to get back with Carl and see if Mr. Knobling might be willing to talk with us.
And really, more than anything else, what resonates with me again and again, and it's not just with Janette and Judy, but with all of the families, is just how many residual effects there are from the murders of two people. The ripples spread out. You've used the expression before. You know, you toss a stone in a pond and the ripples just continue outward. I would say some of the more difficult moments for both of us during those interviews, especially with Judy's, was hearing the really sort of awful side effects that came with David's murder. She described Michael beginning to use drugs to cope.
Yes.
She discussed her own suicide attempt. It's heartbreaking to hear this. And it really, for me, it very much is a reminder that one act of violence, it just ripples and in some cases thunders through a family. And it just causes additional grief after grief after grief. Neither of us had any idea about Judy's suicide attempt. I know I didn't. Certainly, I don't think you did either.
No, I was so shocked and surprised by that. And then, of course, I thought about it quite a bit later, and we talked about it later. Now, here's a mom to two young children, David and Michael. Obviously, you know, we know people that have found themselves in that very, very dark place where the only option to those individuals, including friends of ours, has been to take their own life or attempt to. And when you get to that very, very dark place, and it seems like the choice that you make to end the pain is to end your own life, I was thinking, here's a woman who is going to be leaving a son behind, her son Michael, and just how much darkness and despair could she possibly be dealing with at that point that she would consider taking that drastic step? It's just a very striking moment. I think you can tell from listening to that interview last week, both of us were just completely taken aback. And I'm so glad that she didn't make that terrible decision. Although she also makes it clear that it isn't like her life is all sweetness and light or anything like that. At the same time, we got into a fantastic conversation about Michael, who's someone that we've both met, and we like him very much and admire him and his turning his own life around. Here's a guy that really revered his older brother. This is a loss beyond any kind of calculus. It's just incredible how much this family has suffered. And yet Michael comes out of this situation, and she thanked the drug court. I was very struck by that. And she said, you know, with the help of the drug court, he was able to turn his life around. And, you know, he's married and has a family, and he's a fantastic guy. Does he have his own struggles and dark moments? I'm sure he does. At the same time, I'm so glad that they were able to come through this incredibly dark time, this time of great loss, and come out with something approaching a sense of hope and light and some degree of peace.
Sure.
Michael is very much still in thrall to his older brother. You can tell he really still idolizes David. And perhaps all of us tend to, you know, kind of lionize the ones we've lost. I know I certainly do that with my sister, Kathy. I mean, she'd probably clap me upside the head and say, you know, don't make me out to be something I wasn't. But listening to Judy's story and listening to Janette's recollection of their experiences, it's very, very striking just how profound their loss has been.
And it does just have to make it all that much more painful knowing that there has been this awful loss and that there is still no answer. I mean, clearly you can speak to this a whole lot more than I can. It's got to be awful knowing that you have to deal with this loss of this amazing person in your life, but then it's compounded by the fact that you know that the person who did this is out there still not paying for it. I've said it before and I'll say it here again. I don't know how you all move forward one day at a time. I don't know that I could.
All I can tell you is you don't have a choice. You just keep moving forward. That's it. This is one of those things. It's like an immovable block of stone in your life, and you just have to work your way around it and just keep going. You have no other choice. One of the things that was very interesting to me when we started talking about next steps with both women, and I asked Janette and then Judy the next week about the potential for advanced forensic testing, and we're really pushing the FBI to conduct advanced forensic testing in the FBI cases. We also intend to try to amp up the pressure on our friends at the Virginia State Police to conduct a top-to-bottom review of all of the available evidence. There's so much more capability in terms of forensic testing using much less DNA, consuming less of available samples, being able to handle DNA that's cross-contaminated, that's badly broken down because it's 30 to 34 years old. We get the challenges that the crime labs are facing, yet there have been significant developments. And speaking frankly, the private labs are ahead of many of the public labs, the law enforcement labs, in terms of this capability. And we're really going to continue to push our law enforcement partners to test and retest evidence. Now, there is DNA evidence in the Edwards Knobling case. As we understand it, it's pretty badly degraded. It's coming up on 34 years old. The two bodies were exposed to water and likely seawater. There's, they're heading out towards the ocean, so there's some salt there. And the bodies weren't found for 3 days. Our understanding is that there may be testable DNA there. It has been tested in the past. Those tests were not conclusive. We understand that was the best shot we had at the time. It was very interesting that both of our guests said they would very much like to see additional testing done. And then I just tossed out a theoretical one that I've talked to law enforcement about is there may be very little DNA evidence left. Some tests do consume DNA. So I asked the theoretical question of both Janette and Judy, if the testing consumed the last bit of DNA available, would you be comfortable with that? I was very struck by the fact that both women said, yes, absolutely yes. What are we waiting for?
I was struck by that too. At least at that point, you would know where you stand. You would know, okay, we have done absolutely everything that we can do, and we didn't have an answer. That's something we have to live with. Or we've done everything we can. We tossed a Hail Mary pass. It worked. Check out this awesome breakthrough. We got the guy. Boom. We have answers. We have justice. But either way, at least you know where you stand. This way, it's got to be just this endless, awful cycle of wondering, are they going to test it? Is there enough there to test? Is the technology ever going to be okay? When are we going to get answers? That has to be awful. That's like purgatory. I can't imagine what it must be like to live with that. I don't know if that's the same experience you have had, knowing that there is still evidence from Kathy and Becky's case that can be tested. But that's got to be the worst kind of limbo.
I think that's a good characterization. There are 16 parents of 8 victims in the Colonial Parkway murders. Now, whether these cases are related or not, I don't know. I'll be honest as always and openly skeptical. I'm not sure these murders are necessarily all related.
Right.
While we've been waiting 30 to 34 years, we've lost 8 of the 16 parents in this case. These people died. My parents died waiting for answers in this case. Other people's parents are gone now. Both Lowers, Mr. and Mrs. Lauer, are gone.
The Calls.
Both the Calls, Mr. and Mrs. Call, are gone. My parents are gone. My dad would probably want to say Dr. Thomas because he got his PhD later, but no disrespect, Dad. We've lost half the parents waiting for answers.
Yeah.
Both Judy and Janette had similar responses, which is, what are we waiting for?
Yeah. Take the Hail Mary.
Yeah.
Take the Hail Mary.
I'll take the Hail Mary pass any day. So far, I've talked to a lot of the family members, and we'll continue asking this question as we move forward. Most everybody has said the exact same thing. And nobody has ever pushed back and said, oh, let's wait a few more years
Yeah.
to see if we get answers. The science has gotten better and better. Let's take our best shot.
That limbo, that feeling of when is somebody going to get around to this? When is somebody going to, decide? As somebody posted on our Facebook page the other day, test the GD evidence in all caps. Actually, a couple of people have posted that before.
I can understand that observation.
It's test the evidence, because then at least you have these families at a place where they're like, okay, we have an answer. It's not the answer that we want. There is no more DNA, but at least it's an answer. You can shut down that particular avenue and go, okay, the case isn't going to be solved through DNA. What else do we got?
Well said. On that note, we'll let you know that we're going to be continuing to explore the Colonial Parkway murders in the coming weeks, as well as getting into other issues, other cases, and other questions. We'll be continuing to return to this case and asking these questions until we get the answers that we seek.
Absolutely, as we should. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of Mind Over Murder, this live edition of Mind Over Murder, live from the Maple House. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.